I dropped my silver fork, the sharp clang echoing like a gunshot through the silent dining room. Across the white tablecloth, my stepmother held a fresh legal document in her trembling, manicured hands. Her eyes locked onto mine with a cold, triumphant smirk. "Your name has been erased from the family heritage," she whispered proudly in front of the entire family gala. "You leave this house with absolutely nothing." The guests gasped, turning their heads away in pity, expecting me to break down into tears. Instead, I stood up, pushed my chair back with absolute composure, and walked out onto the freezing terrace. I pulled out my phone and made one single, calculated call that would completely destroy her multi-million-dollar empire by dawn. What did I tell the person on the other end of the line? Hit that subscribe button right now to see the unforgettable way I reclaimed my dignity and turned the tables. My name is Mia Anderson. I am 27 years old, and my entire life has been measured not in hours, but in the rich, comforting aromas of simmering reduction, sauces, roasted garlic, and freshly baked artisan sourdough. I am the head chef of Anderson's Hearth, a legacy restaurant nestled in the breathtaking, sun-drenched valleys of Northern California. People who work with me in the kitchen often describe me as quiet, graceful, and incredibly focused under pressure. I do not believe in the chaotic, shouting environment that defines so many modern commercial kitchens. Instead, I find my strength in absolute composure and the meticulous precision of a perfectly balanced plate. My late mother always told me that a true culinary artist does not rule with anger, but with respect for the ingredients and the people serving them. I lived by that philosophy every day, valuing my dignity, my passion for the culinary arts, and the deep, unshakable respect for the heritage my family built. Home was a magnificent, sprawling farmhouse surrounded by rolling green hills and our own private organic vegetable orchards. It was a place where the evening air always tasted of the crispy mountain breeze and wild rosemary. Just a short walk from our front porch sat the heart of our economic and emotional life, the flagship restaurant of Anderson's Hearth. Our daily life was a beautifully orchestrated symphony of shared family passion. Every single morning began at the break of dawn, with our kitchen staff prepping fresh produce harvested straight from our backyard gardens. My father and I would spend 8 to 10 hours a day working side by side at the pass, tasting new creations, adjusting spices, and sharing warm laughter with regular guests who traveled from all over the United States just to experience our hospitality. Economically, we were highly successful, but our true wealth was the harmony of our home, where creativity and mutual respect flourished every single day. My relationship with my father was the absolute cornerstone of my existence. He was my mentor, my fiercest protector, and the man who taught me that a recipe is nothing without the soul of the person cooking it. After my mother passed away, when I was just a young girl, our house never felt empty or lonely because it was constantly filled with music, the warmth of the roaring hearth, and our shared dreams for the future. We were a team, a lineage of passionate creators, bound by a profound respect for our craft and our community. We spent our evenings mapping out ways to expand our culinary philosophy while staying true to our roots. But a quiet shadow slipped into our paradise when the fire burned bright. 3 years ago, my father introduced a new presence into our lives. Her name was Emma. She was undeniably elegant, beautifully polished, and carried herself with an air of sophisticated high society that felt entirely different from our rustic, hard-working lifestyle. At first, she smiled warmly at our guests, spoke with a gentle, reassuring voice, and seemed to admire the creative rhythm of our home. My father, who deeply deserved happiness in his later years, welcomed her fully into his heart, and out of pure love for him, I welcomed her too. For a brief window of time, our household appeared complete and prosperous. For the first many months following my father's sudden passing, however, the surface of our lives remained remarkably calm and comfortable. The seasonal rhythm of Anderson's Hearth continued to ground me, providing a safe harbor for my grief. I threw all my emotional energy into my work, focusing intensely on designing a brand new, sophisticated winter tasting menu that would honor my father's memory and maintain our prestigious reputation. My days were filled with the familiar, soothing textures of our craft, selecting the finest locally sourced truffles, preparing rich venison reductions, and ensuring that every single plate leaving my kitchen was an absolute masterpiece of flavor and presentation. At home, the atmosphere between Emma and me was polite, quiet, and seemingly supportive. We shared the large farmhouse, in a state of respectful distance. She managed the front-of-house guest relations and the high-level corporate accounts with her usual elegant efficiency, while I ruled the kitchen with absolute creative freedom. My ultimate dream was to expand our culinary philosophy by establishing a small, exclusive cooking academy right on our property, teaching the next generation of young chefs the importance of farm-to-table integrity and classical techniques. I deeply believe that by expanding our reach while keeping our core values completely intact, the Anderson legacy would endure for many decades to come. Emma would often nod encouragingly during our brief morning encounters over coffee, offering soft, pleasant smiles that made me feel secure in our shared management of the family estate. Yet, as the autumn leaves fell and the cold winter winds began to sweep through the valley, tiny, unsettling ripples started to disturb the peace. The first subtle signal occurred on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I had walked up to the main office to submit the weekly invoice for our organic microgreen supplier, a local family farmer who had worked with my father for over 15 years. As I approached the door, I caught the distinct sound of Emma's voice, devoid of its usual warmth, speaking in a sharp, hurried whisper to someone on her private phone. She was using complex legal terms, mentioning corporate restructured assets, share liquidations, and an unfamiliar out-of-town investment firm. The moment my shoes lightly tapped against the hardwood floor outside the door, the whispering stopped instantly. When I stepped inside, Emma was already standing by the window, her expression perfectly composed. A gentle, artificial smile instantly returning to her face as she smoothly slid a stack of legal documents into her desk drawer. She casually dismissed my presence, claiming she was merely handling routine insurance renewals with our family attorneys. I smiled back and handed her the invoice, desperately wanting to believe her logical explanation. But as I walked back down to the warmth of my kitchen, a strange, lingering coldness remained in my chest. A deep, unshakable intuition whispered that behind the heavy closed doors of her private study, a completely different story was being written, and the peaceful world I took for granted was beginning to shift beneath my feet. The first true fracture in our world occurred just 3 weeks before our annual Christmas Eve gala, shattering the normal routine of the kitchen. It started with the arrival of our morning delivery truck. Instead of the vibrant, fragrant crates of hand-picked heirloom carrots, organic and artisanal cheeses from our local valley partners, the delivery driver began unloading heavy, unmarked cardboard boxers filled with frozen, prepackaged goods and chemically preserved ingredients. I stood on the loading dock, staring at the synthetic labels in complete disbelief, my heart dropping as I realized this was not a simple deliverying mistake. I did not let my anger show in front of the kitchen staff. Instead of confronting Emma with loud accusations, I quietly carried 2 of the frozen boxers straight into the kitchen, gathered my sous chefs, and opened them on the central prep table. I instructed my team to prepare a traditional braised beef dish using these new commercial ingredients, alongside a controlled dish made from our remaining fresh, organic stock. 30 minutes later, we gathered around the pass for a blind tasting. The results were utterly devastating. The meat was tough, the sauce tasted flat and artificial, and the vibrant, soulful depth that defined Anderson's hearth was completely absent. It was an insult to our guests, and a direct violation of my father's lifelong culinary standards. With the plate of ruined food in my hand, I walked up to the administrative office. My posture, perfectly straight, my expression, calm but unyielding. I placed the dish on Emma's pristine mahogany desk, without saying a single word. Emma looked up from her computer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the sight of the food. The polite, gentle mask she usually wore slipped for a brief second, replaced by a cold, calculating look of supreme indifference. She didn't even bother to taste it. Instead, she elegantly leaned back in her chair and informed me that she had signed a new exclusive distribution contract with a mass-market commercial supplier to drastically cut our operational costs and maximize our profit margins. When I calmly reminded her that our reputation was built entirely on fresh, premium quality, she chuckled softly, a patronizing sound that chilled me to the bone. She told me that guests wouldn't notice the difference if the presentation looked expensive enough, and that it was time for Anderson's hearth to stop acting like a small-town kitchen and start operating like a real modern corporation. I took a deep breath, picked up the plate, and walked back down to my kitchen in absolute silence, refusing to engage in a screaming match. My mind was racing with a dangerous mixture of worry and suspicion. I chose not to push back further that day, needing time to think, but as I watched my culinary team struggle to work with the inferior ingredients, I knew this was only the first wave of a much larger coordinated assault on my father's legacy. Over the next 10 days, the situation escalated with a terrifying, calculated speed. The high-quality artisanal ingredients that had defined our menu for over 2 decades were systematically replaced by cheap, bulk-ordered substitutes. Longtime regular guests began leaving their plates huffy, their faces clouded with subtle disappointment as they politely questioned why our signature sauces tasted different. Each untouched dish that returned to the dishwashing station felt like a direct blow to my soul, an emotional wound that deepened with every service. The true turning point arrived late on a rainy Thursday evening, long after the final guests had departed, and the kitchen lights were dimmed. I returned to the main office to retrieve my personal recipe journal, which I had accidentally left near the reception desk. As I crossed the darkened hallway, I noticed a bright sliver of light spilling from Emma's private study. The door was slightly ajar, driven by a sudden, intense wave of suspicion. I stepped closer and peered inside. Emma was sitting at her desk, deeply engrossed in a video call with a representative from a notorious multi-million-dollar fast food conglomerate. Spread out across her desk were detailed architectural blueprints of our beautiful, historic farmhouse and restaurant. I held my breath as I listened to her crisp, cold voice confidently outline a complete corporate restructuring plan. She was negotiating the sale of the Anderson brand name, proposing to demolish our historic dining room and orchard to build a massive, standardized drive-through franchise location. My heart shattered into a million pieces as her words echoed in the quiet room. It was the ultimate betrayal. She wasn't just making poor business decisions, she was actively planning to erase every single trace of my parents' hard work from the face of the earth. Unable to contain my shock, I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Emma froze, quickly ending the call and sliding the blueprints beneath a folder, but her face remained entirely devoid of guilt. When I demanded an explanation, pointing out that she was destroying the family heritage, she stood up slowly, her elegant facade completely vanishing to reveal an icy, ruthless opportunist. She looked at me with immense disdain and reminded me that under the current corporate structure, she held the majority of the administrative shares. She coldly stated that my emotional attachment to fine dining was a financial liability and that she had the legal authority to steer the company wherever she saw fit. I stood there, trembling with an intense, suffocating mix of grief and betrayal, realizing that our peaceful life had vanished forever. The woman my father had loved was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and I was now locked in a desperate battle for the survival of everything I held dear. I spent the entire night awake in my kitchen, staring at the cold stainless steel counters, refusing to let despair paralyze me. By dawn, my sadness had hardened into a sharp, clear sense of purpose. I was not going to let Emma erase my family history without a fight. I immediately set a definitive goal. I would protect the integrity of Anderson's hearth by mobilizing the people who actually built it. Forcing a corporate veto before she could finalize the sale to the fast food conglomerate, my first concrete step began that very morning. I secretly called an emergency meeting with our 3 minority shareholders, elderly local investors who had been my father's closest friends and original backers, alongside our 5 senior kitchen and floor staff. We gathered in the quiet herb garden behind the restaurant, away from Emma's watchful eyes. With absolute clarity and poise, I revealed the blueprints I had seen and explained her plan to demolish our legacy for a corporate payout. I urged them to stand with me, to use their collective minority voting shares and institutional loyalty to block any restructuring or sale at the upcoming annual board meeting. The initial response was powerful. The older investors were deeply offended by Emma's greed, and my staff pledged their absolute allegiance to me. However, the rintang and barat from Emma arrived much faster and heavier than I had anticipated. Somehow, she discovered our secret meeting by the afternoon. Instead of confronting me directly, she struck back with a ruthless, calculated corporate maneuver. By closing time, every single senior staff member who had attended my meeting received a formal disciplinary notice on their phones, citing breach of contract for discussing internal corporate affairs outside of official channels. Even worse, Emma had spent the past 48 hours sweet-talking the principal bank that held our expansion loans, presenting them with her highly inflated, aggressive financial projections for the mass-market franchise. The bank, driven purely by the promise of massive, rapid profit margins, immediately threw its immense financial weight behind Emma's proposal. They threatened to recall out existing restaurant loans early if the board resisted her restructuring plan, effectively paralyzing my minority investors with the fear of total bankruptcy. The pressure on me became almost too heavy to bear. Every time I walked through the dining room, Emma would watch me with a smug, triumphant grin, knowing she had effectively isolated me using the cold machinery of corporate law. The emotional tension inside the house and the kitchen reached a suffocating peak, leaving me with a pounding heart and a desperate realization that my conventional legal options were rapidly slipping away. Refusing to back down, I poured all my remaining energy into one final, desperate defense of my father's vision. If the bank and the investors were blinded by Emma's cold financial numbers, I would have to make them see the true, irreplaceable value of our culinary artistry. I spent 3 grueling days preparing for a special, closed-door showcase. I invited the bank representatives and the minority shareholders to a private tasting event at the restaurant, planning to present a menu so profoundly exquisite that it would prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that our fine dining reputation was far more valuable than a cheap fast food franchise. I worked 48 hours straight, without a single hour of sleep, refining every glaze, perfecting the temperature of the ovens, and selecting the absolute last of our premium organic reserves. My hands were blistered, and my eyes burned with exhaustion, but my spirit was fueled by pure determination. When the evening of the showcase arrived, I stood at the kitchen pass, personally plate dressing each course, with meticulous, breathless care. The dishes were flawless, carrying the deep, soulful aromas that my father had spent his entire life perfecting. However, the plan did not go as I had so desperately hoped. Emma had already anticipated my move and completely sabotaged the event before the first plate even touched the table. As the guests sat down, she walked into the dining room with a sleek tablet, completely bypassing my culinary presentation. She intercepted the bank representatives and began displaying an aggressive, highly polished digital slideshow filled with complex bar graphs, guaranteed multi-million-dollar real estate projections, and immediate cash flow charts. The corporate executives barely looked at my food. Their eyes were glued entirely to the flashing numbers on her screen. They drank her expensive champagne, nodded eagerly at her cold financial metrics, and completely ignored the artistry I had poured my soul into. By the end of the night, the lead banker shook Emma's hand, openly declaring their official endorsement of her franchise transition. I stood alone in the dark, empty kitchen at midnight, surrounded by trays of untouched, cooling food. I felt utterly defeated, trapped in a profound, suffocating silence. It was my absolute lowest point. I sank onto a wooden crate, burying my face in my hands as tears of pure exhaustion and helplessness finally broke through my composure. I was completely alone, financially outmaneuvered, and utterly powerless against the cold machinery of Emma's greed. Then, as I casually leaned my head back against the old prep table, my hand brushed against a loose wooden panel at the back of my father's old recipe shelf. It shifted. Intrigued, I pulled the panel away, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside lay a dusty, leather-bound folder tied with a faded red ribbon, accompanied by a handwritten note in my father's elegant script. My heart skipped a beat as I untied the ribbon and scanned the legal headings. It was not a duplicate will, but a completely independent personal trademark and intellectual property agreement, sealed long before Emma had ever entered our lives. A tiny, brilliant ray of hope pierced through my darkness. I had finally found the one secret weapon Emma's corporate lawyers had completely overlooked. But before I could even begin to process the legal weight of the document, the fateful night of the annual Christmas Eve gala arrived, bringing the entire conflict to a massive, unstoppable explosion. The grand dining room of Anderson's hearth was a breathtaking display of holiday luxury, illuminated by the warm, golden glow of dozens of crystal chandeliers and decorated with massive pine wreaths. The tables were crowded with the valley's most prominent high society figures, influential corporate investors, regional bank executives, and our entire extended family, all dressed in elegant formal attire. The air was thick with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and sophisticated laughter, but beneath the festive surface, the emotional tension was completely suffocating. I sat near the head of the main family table, wearing a simple, elegant, dark dress, my posture perfectly straight despite the crushing weight in my chest. Emma sat directly opposite me, radiant in an expensive designer gown, radiating absolute triumph as she played the role of the perfect, grieving widow turned successful corporate mate. She waited until the main course was served and the room reached its peak of celebratory warmth to deliver her final, devastating blow. Standing up gracefully, she tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, instantly silencing the entire dining room. With a practiced, sorrowful sigh that didn't reach her cold eyes, Emma announced to the entire gathering that, following a recent independent review of the family estate, a new, legally binding revision to my father's will had been finalized. She stared directly at me across the white tablecloth, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on her lips as her crisp voice echoed through the silent room. She calmly declared that my name had been completely erased from the family inheritance, and that she was now the sole absolute owner of the Anderson brand, the farmhouse, and the land. The room froze in absolute shock. My cousins and aunts gasped softly, quickly turning their heads away in pity, while the corporate executives exchanged knowing, satisfied nods. Emma expected me to break. She had staged this public humiliation to force me into a screaming match, to make me look hysterical and unstable in front of the board members, completely destroying my professional credibility forever. She was using the absolute highest point of family holiday celebration to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my livelihood. Every single effort I had made over the past weeks, the shareholder meetings, the culinary showcase, the appeals to our history had failed completely. I was trapped, publicly stripped of my heritage, and faced with an agonizing, impossible choice. I could either sit there, accept her absolute dominance, and watch her demolish my father's life work, or I could stand up and risk everything on a dangerous, unpredictable. The silence in the room stretched for 10 agonizing seconds, every eye locked onto me, waiting for my spirit to finally crush under the immense, ruthless pressure of her betrayal. But instead of shedding a single tear, or raising my voice in a desperate cry, a profound, serene calmness washed over me. I slowly stood up from the dinner table, my movements incredibly poised, exuding a quiet power that caught everyone completely off guard. I looked Emma directly in the eyes with absolute dignity, maintaining a cold, unyielding silence that made her triumphant smirk falter for a brief fraction of a second. Without saying a single word to the shocked crowd, I elegantly turned around, walked out of the suffocating dining room, and stepped onto the quiet, snow-dusted outdoor terrace. The freezing night air cleared my mind instantly. I pulled out my phone from my clutch bag and made the most important, calculated phone call of my entire life. I dialed the private number of Isabella Wilson, the most feared, legendary culinary critic in the United States, whose reviews could launch or completely destroy any restaurant empire overnight. Isabella had been my late mother's closest childhood friend, but her strict professional integrity meant she never offered empty favors. Mia, her powerful, authoritative voice, echoed through the line. "I heard what is happening down there. Are you ready?" "I am ready, Isabella," I replied, my voice steady, filled with an unshakable determination. "I am activating the secret clause. The documents my father left behind are in my hands. Emma is announcing the corporate franchise transition tonight." "Consider it done," Isabella responded sharply. "The culinary world will know the truth by dawn." Emma had made one fatal, arrogant mistake in her rush to corporate greed. She had hired expensive corporate lawyers, but she had completely failed to understand the actual foundation of our business. The leather-bound folder I had discovered in the kitchen contained a ironclad, independent intellectual property contract. My father had legally registered every single signature recipe, menu design, and the proprietary culinary blend of Anderson's Hearth under my personal name on my 21st birthday. Emma legally inherited the physical building and the brand name. But the actual soul of the restaurant, the food that brought in millions of dollars and every single 5-star rating, belonged entirely and exclusively to me. I hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and walked back into the bright dining room, my high heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence. The room fell into an immediate, breathless silence as I approached the head of the table where Emma stood. With a beautiful, calm smile, I addressed the entire gathering of investors, family members, and bank executives. "Emma has indeed changed the will," I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "But she forgot that you cannot inherit a chef's soul. Effective immediately, I am legally withdrawing every single proprietary recipe, menu layout, and culinary creation from this establishment. As of tonight, Anderson's Hearth has no menu, no recipes, and no head chef." The reaction was instantaneous and utterly explosive. The lead bank representative jumped to his feet, his face turning pale as he realized that the multi-million-dollar franchise deal he just endorsed was suddenly completely empty. The minority investors began murmuring frantically, their eyes widening in sheer panic as they looked at the legal draft sheet I calmly placed on the table. Emma's jaw dropped in absolute horror, her flawless, elegant mask completely shattering into pieces as she stared at the official intellectual property documents. In one single powerful moment, the tables had completely turned, and the audience watched in absolute awe as a young woman reclaimed her heritage with nothing but her intelligence and absolute dignity. By the very next morning, the crushing weight of my calculated counterattack hit Emma with the force of an unstoppable tidal wave. Isabella Wilson kept her word with devastating, flawless precision. At dawn, her syndicated column, the most widely read culinary publication in the United States, published a front page expose detailing Emma's corporate greed and her secret plans to demolish the historic landmark. More importantly, Isabella officially informed the global culinary community that I had legally withdrawn all proprietary rights to the menu. The consequences for Emma were immediate, severe, and entirely free of physical conflict. Within 24 hours of the article's release, the multi-million-dollar fast food conglomerate officially canceled their contract, citing a massive, irreparable risk to their public brand reputation. The principal bank, realizing they were now financing an empty building without a functional menu or a reputable chef, immediately revoked their aggressive expansion loans, plunging Emma's corporate entity into a state of sudden, inescapable financial panic. Customers from all across Northern California began canceling their holiday reservations in droves, refusing to spend their money at an establishment that had betrayed its founding principles. Emma's grand dining room became a ghost town. Every single night, she sat completely alone in her empty restaurant, staring at the vacant tables, surrounded by nothing but the mounting bills and the cold, silent machinery of her failed ambition. Her elite high society friends completely abandoned her overnight, erasing her from their exclusive guest lists. Yet, I did not seek revenge. I simply let the natural laws of integrity and quality take their course. Meanwhile, a brilliant, beautiful new door opened for my kitchen family and me. On the day after Christmas, the 3 elderly minority shareholders, who had completely severed their ties with Emma, approached me with a historic proposition. They offered to help me purchase an old, breathtakingly beautiful stone mill located just 2 miles down the valley, completely independent of the Anderson brand name. The true beauty of this transition was the unshakable loyalty of my staff. Every single line, cook, dishwasher, and front-of-house server resigned from Emma's empty restaurant and walked straight into my new kitchen. They chose to follow the craft, not the corporation. Together, we worked around the clock to transform the old stone mill into a gorgeous, warm, and authentic culinary haven named Mia's. We brought back our beloved local family suppliers, restocking our pantries with the finest fresh truffles, vibrant organic microgreens, and artisanal cheeses. By the second week of January, our new boutique bistro opened its doors to the public, and the response was nothing short of miraculous. Line of eager guests stretched down the block, and the warm, comforting aromas of true, soulful cooking once again filled the crisp valley air, launching a beautiful new era of success built on absolute honesty and unyielding passion. Sitting in my new office overlooking the bustling, vibrant dining room of Mia's Hearth, I can finally take a deep breath and look back at the incredible storm I just weathered. The journey from that heartbreaking Christmas dinner to this beautifully sun-drenched kitchen has been the most challenging, yet profoundly empowering experience of my life. I lost a building, a piece of land, and a family name that I thought defined who I was. But in losing those material things, I discovered a powerful truth. My father's true legacy was never carved into a legal piece of paper, nor was it trapped within the wooden walls of an old farmhouse. His legacy lived inside my hands, my mind, and the unyielding resilience of my spirit. Emma stayed behind in that empty, silent restaurant, holding onto a hollow title and a bankrupted brand, proving that greed will always consume itself from the inside out. I, on the other hand, managed to save the only things that truly mattered: our authentic craft, our local community partners, and the absolute loyalty of a kitchen family that refused to let a corporate dollar buy their souls. True success is not something that can be given to you by a favorable will, nor can it be stolen from you by a cruel stroke of a pen. It is built entirely on the integrity of your daily actions, the passion you pour into your work, and the absolute dignity you maintain when the people around you expect you to break. Standing here today, listening to the beautiful symphony of clinking glasses, warm laughter, and sizzling pans, I know my parents are looking down with immense pride, seeing that the fire they lit in me will continue to burn brightly for generations to come. Through this experience, I learned that when someone tries to push you out or strip you of your worth, you do not have to stoop to their level of anger and chaos. You simply have to know who you are, understand your unique value, and have the courage to walk away and build your own foundation from the ground up. True power does not come from screaming the loudest. It comes from the quiet, strategic composure of knowing your next move. Thank you so much for following my emotional journey through this difficult chapter of my life. Your incredible support and encouragement have kept my spirits high when the nights felt completely dark. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on how this story unfolded. If you were placed in my exact position at that holiday dinner table, would you have found the strength to walk away with your dignity intact? Or would you have chosen a completely different path to fight for your inheritance? Please let me know your honest answers and experiences in the comments section below. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to stand tall in the face of betrayal, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and share this video with your loved ones. Stay strong, believe in your own unique value, and I will see you in our next uplifting